Hello, welcome learners. Welcome to the course BLI 221 Library Information and Society. So, we will be discussing today information institutions. In this course we have been discussing the importance of information, importance of libraries, and we have been discussing this in the context of society. We have discussed earlier how the society has changed, and parallel to that libraries have also changed. Till now we have agreed while we were discussing that libraries cannot do without institutions and society both. Similarly, society and institutions cannot do without libraries. Libraries have been solely responsible for serving the information needs of the society. But then with the changes in the society, particularly changes in the digital world, digital information, the information communication technology, and side by side the changing needs of the different sections of the society, we have seen the origin, development and changes in the library and information institutions that exist. The information institutions have been changing themselves, libraries have been changing themselves. The changes have been in their functions, in their mission objectives, and also in the way they are serving the society. So, these information institutions are of different types. Libraries too have transformed themselves into information institutions, have changed themselves from being traditional libraries. The original concept of library that people had in their mind as institutions which were providing institution service, providing libraries, in providing information on the basis of print resources, they have changed themselves. So, information institutions exist as independent institutions as well as part of libraries. So, we will be seeing how these information institutions exist, what are their different types, how they are serving the society. We will also take up examples of these information institutions. By going through this unit and this discussion today, we will be confident enough, we will be able to understand and later on discuss also and implement how these information institutions differ in their objectives, differ in their processes, operations, procedures and services. So, let us begin with talking about these one by one. As you see here on the screen, we have enumerated these different types of information institutions. Beginning with libraries, we have kept libraries in the beginning because they have existed since times immemorial and they have really served the needs of the society, and the other institutions that we have listed here have with changing time evolved. So, it is a matter of evolution that we have seen libraries changing shape, libraries giving birth to other information institutions also. Though we may agree on a point of view that it is not always libraries, but then there is always a position where we can say yes, libraries have been the reason, have been the factor that have given birth to these different types of institutions. So, we will start with the libraries and move on further one by one. The libraries have changed, and they have changed from being print libraries to paperless libraries. As we all see around, you won't find a library that is only providing services on the basis of its print resources. We have seen that libraries have been moving slowly towards paperless libraries. Though you cannot talk of purely paperless libraries, though it was forecasted around 5 decades back, that even more, we can say 6 decades back, that we will be entering into the era of paperless libraries. Though nowadays the hybrid libraries is the talk of the town, but then there has been a continuous shift towards paperless libraries. And what is the reason? Because the information available all over is digital information. Therefore, libraries cannot do without providing services on the basis of this digital information. That is why we are seeing that libraries are moving towards paperless. Moreover, users, since this information which is available in digital form is important information, at times there is no counterpart in the print world, it is the only information existing, therefore you have to provide this information. Users want this information. Besides that, the advantages of digital information, that it is available 24/7 by 365, it is easily updated, it is constantly changing, so therefore users need it. Moreover, users have very busy schedule, they may not be able to come to the library. So the importance of the library has not come down, but at the same time the libraries have changed themselves, libraries going out of the library going out of the physical confines of the work and moving towards the workplace of the user, moving towards the place where the user wants it, and therefore this is how libraries have been changing themselves. So not only as a place for serious reading, for individual reading, they are now happening places. They are providing spaces, we are calling them maker spaces, where they introduce users to the developments in technologies so that they can learn these technologies, use these technologies, and also take benefit of these information communication technologies. They are providing a place for interaction, they are providing a place for teaching and learning, they are providing a place for learning, discussion, and these could be at different levels. These could be for community interaction also. So libraries acting as local community centers, community information centers. So this is how libraries have been changing. So they are providing an institutional mechanism to provide access to e-resources. What do we mean by this institutional mechanism? When we are talking of so much of digital information around us, when we are talking of so much of electronic information around us, much of this information is free, it is in open access, but a large fraction of this information is paid information. An individual cannot afford to have access to this information. So it is here that libraries come to the help of these users. They provide all this information which is highly paid, and so therefore this is also an important role that libraries are providing. But then again, they provide remote access. The user may not come to the library and still have access to this digital information. And another very important role of libraries, they are acting as repositories. They are there to function as for the preservation of this information for future use also. And moreover, in the context of digital information, they preserve it so that with the changes in technology for storage, for dissemination, they take care of these changes so that people always have access to this information. So as information institutions, we have discussed how libraries have been acting as information institutions. And when we talk of information institution, there is no doubting the fact that library has always been an information institution, but when we talk from the point of view of an information institution, means that it is taking care of the needs of users, of the information needs of users, providing them information per se rather than information in totality or documents for that information. This is how the libraries have been changing themselves, serving the information needs of the community. So this is one category of information institution, and this is how we justify that library too is an information institution. Let us go back to the institutions that we have enumerated. The number 2 type of information institution that we have enumerated here is a documentation center. You might have heard this term documentation center prior to coming to libraries and library information science program or course. You would have seen that there are documentation centers which help us in documentation, which could be legal documentation, so as to satisfy the needs while we are acquiring property or traveling. Also that too is documentation. But when we talk of documentation centers from the point of view of information, from the point of view of libraries and information centers, they are a little different. Let us talk of these documentation centers. Before we talk of these documentation centers, what we have discussed about libraries here, you would see that there is an example of a National Digital Library of India, which shows how library is acting as an information institution. This is a digital library that has been created to serve the needs of users, and this serves the needs of all kinds of users of all age groups, of different subjects, studying at different levels, right from the junior most classes to the highest research. And therefore this is an example of how library is acting as an information institution. Though the library here is a digital library, it is not a library in the sense of the print library. This is another type of library that shows how a library in digital form is serving the needs of the users. We have at times categorized these digital libraries as virtual libraries, digital libraries, and there has been a point of debate whether they are different or they can be used interchangeably. The differentiation between the two at times has been that a digital library has holdings in print form also. They would have digitized the print collections, or they have born digital also and provide access to these. So while having both, and they have their own collections to which they provide access to the different types of users at a distance all the time. Whereas the virtual library has been differentiated as a library with no collection of its own, with no physical infrastructure, with no physical building or something like that, but still it provides access to different types of resources, because it provides access to these in the form of links. They provide access in the form of links to different sources of information, and here is an example of such a library which provides access to the cultural heritage of the country in different forms by the Ministry of Culture, Government of India. This is another parallel example of what we showed here was Indian. This is an Australian example where you find all cultural information. So this is another virtual library that has been created, and so at the national level. And such libraries, the virtual libraries, are possible with the efforts of the whole community. People would like to be involved in such ventures, because one institution on its own cannot do it. Others should have to agree to this philosophy of sharing their resources, providing links to their resources, so that these links could be made available to all those who are interested in having that information. Now let us come to the documentation centers, that is the second type of institutions. So to recapitulate, till now we have seen how libraries have been serving as information institutions, how they have changed shape to be part of the different categories of information institutions, and in that we have shown some examples of digital libraries and virtual libraries. We cannot ever be exhaustive, because this list is endless and you can have as many examples as you would like to have. And the examples that we have shown here were at national level, but if you go and see any institution, you would see that they have their own digital libraries, they have their own digital resources, and they provide access to these. At times only to their own clientele, at times they are open for others also. Therefore, paucity of information is not an issue today, it is the other way around. You have excess of information. Now what is a documentation center and why documentation center? You would have seen that these days you talk more of digital libraries and less of documentation centers, because the concept of documentation center was given long back, when this concept of digital information and the popularity and ease of establishing digital libraries was not that easy. Therefore, the library information science profession had given this concept, in fact had made use of this concept, because the main purpose of having a documentation center was to provide information per se to the users. Basically, it was to provide library outside the library, to provide library services more actively. The concept of a documentation center is that the user should reach to his or her information rather than to reach a source of information. So, the documentation center was, the concept of documentation center was given so as to popularize the information that existed, to make the information available to those who need it in a more active, proactive way, rather than seeing and waiting for the user to come consult a source of information and find information for herself or himself. So, as you see here on your screen, we have defined that documentation center refers to, documentation as a process refers to informing the users about the content of documents of interest to them. So, what these documents have, what they contain is made available to the users. So, the contents of the documents should reach the users, that is the purpose of documentation. You bring to light what is there, you uncover, you unfold the contents of a document for the users, that is the process of documentation, and the centers that have been established to do such thing is called a documentation center. Now, documentation centers provide documentation service. So, it takes care of the needs of users, and more importantly, these needs are taken care of not only when the user comes and expresses the need or expresses the requirements of such information. Before the user coming and asking for that information, it is made available to the user. That means, in anticipation of the user expressing his need, in anticipation of the user feeling the need for that information. That is very important on the part of documentation centers and documentation service. There are different types of products and services that these documentation centers provide to the users. And as you see here enumerated, some of these are bibliography. A bibliography is prepared by a documentation center, and this bibliography is prepared again in two ways. Either the documentation center prepares it in anticipation of the need or in response to the need of the user. As a user, I am working on a subject like documentation. I would request the documentation center to provide me a list of books on documentation. Therefore, it does it for me, it is a responsive service. Otherwise, on the other way round, the center knows I am working in the field of documentation, they have already prepared a bibliography and they supply to me, that is a anticipatory service. Now, the other is index. Let me show you an example of a bibliography. As you see here, this example of a documentation center which exists at national level, and it provides bibliographies on demand and in anticipation. It is a national level documentation center of India, and the name of the center is Indian National Scientific Documentation Center, INSDOC, and it is now has a different name, it is called NISCARE. Earlier it was called INSDOC. Now, this is one example of a documentation center, and there are different documentation centers. This is an example of a national level documentation center. Now, as we were discussing that it takes care of the needs of the users in anticipation as well as in response when the user wants for this service. And one of the services is a bibliography. We will see some examples of bibliographies. These bibliographies could be provided in a particular subject, in a particular area, on a particular issue. It could be a mission based bibliography, it could be as per the requirements of the user. Similarly, indexes are also created by a documentation center. Abstracting services, newspaper clipping services, current awareness services, selective dissemination of information. We will be discussing about all these services in the different courses that we have in the BLS program. Now, there are different types of documentation centers. As we said that the work documentation remains the same, but the scope of work differs, and these centers exist at local level, regional level, national level and international level. So, why at different levels? Because their scope of work is local, regional, national or international. We have already seen one example of a national documentation center just now. As we said, it was earlier named INSDOC, Indian National Scientific Documentation Center, but now it is called NISCARE. Similarly, you can see some more examples. As I was telling you, this is the new name and this is the website also. Now, this is another national documentation center, National Social Science Documentation Center. So, you see these two examples, they are both national documentation centers, but there is a slight difference. The earlier one was a documentation center in the field of science, whereas this is a documentation center in the field of social sciences. So, they are different from the point of view of subject also. This is an example of a regional documentation center. As we had said that there are regional documentation centers also. This is for Europe and this is there are some more examples of regional documentation centers like this one, SARC documentation centers. Now, with changing times, some of these documentation centers have been dormant also, and the reason is because so much of information is available in digital form. There are so many institutions that take care of such needs of the users, particularly in view of knowing the needs. Because of the technology that helps us, we are able to know what sort of needs users have, and with the available push-pull technology that is there, we are able to serve our users. But as students of library information science, we should be knowing about these centers, because we should also know how it has developed and we should also be knowing the history. This is an example of an international documentation center which is one of the oldest, but now no more active. The way I have been telling that the reason behind their dormancy is with the changing advancements not only in the technology but also the information availability. And this is FID, International Federation for Information and Documentation. So, we have seen some examples at the international and local and the regional level. This is another international documentation center, but this is not in a particular subject like science or social sciences, but it is in a particular form of document, that is patents. So, you may have different documentation centers as far as their scope is concerned, which could be scope from the point of view of geographical area, scope from the point of view of subject or discipline, or also scope from the point of view of a particular form of document. You know, patent is a very important form of document and one should know what has been patented, and therefore, this has also been the reason for having such a documentation center. So, now we are very clear about the different types of documentation centers. We also know what are the services of documentation centers. Now, as we have said about the different products of the documentation centers, and we had mentioned that bibliography is one of the product that these documentation centers create, they do that in anticipation as well as on demand. Here you see an example in National Social Science Documentation Center, and you see here one example of a bibliography. Similarly, they create bibliography in different areas as per the needs of the users. They create abstracts also, and it's not a optional service, or it's not a service which is provided at irregular intervals, but it is a regular service that is provided by the National Science Documentation Center, which was earlier named INSTOC, now called NISCARE, and this is the Indian Science Abstracts. It's a very important service because you come to know of what literature is being provided, is being produced in the field of science, and therefore it has its own importance. Now let us go further down into the next type of information institution, and this is a information analysis center. You know, as the name indicates that it is such a center exists because they analyze the information, and therefore on the basis of that analysis they create information products. And I read out here a definition of a very authentic source, that is the Committee on Scientific and Technical Information. It has defined an information analysis center as a formally structured organizational unit. Mind you, it says a formally structured, because when you talk of a particular mission or goal or objective, you need to have a formal structure also. So it's a formally structured organization or unit, specifically but not necessarily exclusively. Though it is, the purpose is specifically information analysis, but then it could be part of an institution also. It could be part of a library also. Therefore, we say not necessarily exclusive, established for the purpose of acquiring, selecting, storing, retrieving, evaluating, analyzing, and synthesizing the body of information. So, see how many processes are involved, that you need to select information, because you have so much of information around. You should not see that everything should be selected. You need to select on the basis of the requirements of the users, and then you store it, you retrieve it, and evaluate that information. Evaluate from the point of view of its authenticity, on the point of view of its scope, from the point of view of the needs of the users and requirements of the users. Analyze it, synthesize it as far as the contents and format of that information is concerned. We further go into the definition, synthesizing the body of information in a clearly defined and specialized field. It is in a very specific field, micro field, because the requirements of such information is not of the general public. It is for those who are working in specific areas. They really require such information services. Therefore, specialized field or pertaining to a specified mission. If it should be mission specific also, with the intent of compiling, digesting, repackaging, or otherwise organizing and presenting pertinent information. So, there are some very useful terms, very important terms, that once you have selected and collected and analyzed that information, evaluated that information, you need to compile it, you need to digest it, you need to repackage that information and organize and present that information, that pertinent information or data, in a form most authoritative, timely, and useful to a society of peers and management. So, see, we have also taken care that it has to be repackaged. Not only the contents, but the form and format should also be such that it really serves your users, and it should be provided in a timely manner. That is also very important, and it should be authoritative. The information should be authoritative. Therefore, you have to see, while you are collecting that information, that source of information is authoritative, is authentic, and it has to be useful, because if it doesn't really serve the needs and requirements of the people, then it may not be used. So this is how an information analysis center is defined. We would like to see whether there are information analysis centers. We have many at different levels. I would request you all to go and see whether we have information analysis centers. Try to find out, prepare a list of such centers in different fields, in different countries, and that would reinforce your learning. Information analysis, it is a very important activity, because you know that there is a lot of information around us and it is freely and free also available. But then to see that yes, exact information which is pinpointed, exhaustive, at the same time may be critical also, is provided to the users as per their needs and requirements. So to understand what a information analysis center does and what are the different types of products and activities that a information analysis center is involved in, we have shown here in the present slide these activities and products. If you see on the left side, we have mentioned the activities that an information analysis center is involved in, and on the right side, corresponding to these activities, what are the different products that are created out of these activities. These activities, to begin with, is that a center selects and collects information, and it is not that every information that is available is selected and collected. Therefore, as the term itself says, it is selected, and out of that, what are the products that are created are bibliographies, the current awareness products. So bibliography may not always be current, it could be retrospective also, but you could prepare a bibliography keeping in view the current information needs of your users. So this activity results into these products. Now the next activity is abstracting and indexing, and you get the products that you create out of these are abstracts and indexes. And these abstracts and indexes again could be customized, could be keeping in view the demands of the users or in anticipation. These could be parts of other documents or could act and exist as individual independent products also. It could be extraction of information also, and you know, in extraction you extract some information and provide it as a descriptive review or as a compilation, and this is just extracted means it has been taken out of from the original source. You have not done anything in addition to that, it has just been culled out. That is why you say it is extraction. But in case you do some critical process on the extraction, then it is called evaluation. The person who is doing that evaluates that extracted information, that culled out information, and the products are many that are created out of it. It could be a critical review of some area, it could be a critical compilation of data, it could be a solution to some intermediate or immediate problem, it could be correlation of data, or it could be prediction of properties. So it is a little difficult, it requires highly specialized people and having knowledge, having competence in that, and therefore in such information analysis centers you find people who have high academic credentials and the language and technical competence, they are involved in such activities. Therefore, we will see further how these information analysis centers function, what are these different processes and activities that they do, and in turn what sort of institutions exist doing such activities. We will continue in further discussions. Thank you.